Hi guys, Lone Wanderer here. Okay, so been putting this off for a while now. Quite a few months ago, I was on about doing different modules for bushcraft. Started from the very basics, like knives and things like that, and equipment, sleeping systems, etc. So this is going to be the start of the very basics. So obviously this is going to be as basic as you're going to get. So these videos are going to be for when you're first getting into bushcraft and what tools you choose and where to get them from and things like that, which obviously will going to be discussed in my videos. So I've not done a video actually inside for a while. I hate doing videos inside, or rather do them outside, but it's not very nice weather today, so especially to a video like this. And I've got quite a lot of knives on the table to display, which is part of the video, which I'll explain later. So when I first did bushcraft, God, many years ago, a very long time ago, when I first got my camping addiction, well, before my teens actually, it's probably around maybe 10 years old, I started doing camping and things, and never really knew what I was doing or where I was going with it. And at the time I was just camping out for just for the fun of it with my mates and things, and we didn't really well, we did use knives. We used like pocket knives and things like that, but we never really knew what we were doing until later on in my teens, when I started to really get into bushcraft and find out all the ins and outs and how to use your tools correctly and things. So if you're like me and you're first starting out, now the world of bushcraft is massive, really massive. There's hundreds of shops worldwide selling bushcraft equipment and the very latest bushcraft wear, tools, knives, axes, everything to do with what you're going to be doing in the world of bushcraft. And I don't expect anybody to pick bushcraft up straight away, especially like me when I first started, when I was very limited in funds and money. When I first like bushcraft, I didn't have a job or anything like that. And I had no guidance either, because back then bushcraft was, when I was growing up, I had nobody really to influence me in that kind of area, until I started watching like TV things. I think I saw, I think it was Ray Mears program in the 90s. It was a Ray Mears program. I think that's what kind of started me off, but I was very young at the time, immature. So it's not till probably later on when I decided to take a full interest in it. Obviously with my mental health problems as well, can't go into it obviously on video. Got obviously quite a few things wrong with me, including ADHD, and you'll know, anybody with ADHD, it's quite difficult to keep doing the same thing without losing the interest. And I've done hundreds of things in my life but never really stuck to it. But bushcraft and going outside in the great outdoors and hiking and camping and things like that, that's really good for your mental health. So I guess that's probably why I stuck to it, where I've failed in every other thing that I've done in life. But anyway, so we're here to discuss about bushcraft knives. Okay, so again, this is purely for the novice. Obviously there's thousands of people, a lot of people that I know that know everything there is to know about knives, knife steel, knife grinds and things like that, because obviously it's their job, they do it every day. And like I said at the start of this video, bushcraft is a massive world, full of retails and cons and pros and the consumer market out there is absolutely massive. You wouldn't have thought it for bushcraft, but it is. It's a lot bigger than you think. And for somebody that's new to bushcraft and really wants to do bushcraft, it can be quite daunting, if you like. It's like, where do I start? You know, and they tend to watch YouTube videos quite a lot, which I do quite a lot. That's become my new educational source kind of thing, because obviously when I was growing up, the only thing that was available to me resource-wise was books. So I can tend to read one book after another, after another, after another to gain some knowledge. My favourite book is, the most popular book is SAS Survival by the great SAS legend and survival instructor, John Lofty Wiseman, and which I've still got, by the way. I've still got that little book made by Collins Gem. So out there in the great outdoors, where do you start with your first knife? And it's a difficult question to ask, because obviously there's so much choice, there's so much steels. But when I'm talking about the very basics, forget about, well, there's two scales. There is the budget end of the scale, and there is the higher end of the scale. Okay, now at the minute, at your level, you need to be down here at the very beginning of the scale, the budget scale. Okay, and the reason for that is you need to learn everything there is to know about using a bushcraft knife. You need to learn how to maintain it. You need to learn how to obviously definitely use it properly, and eventually, which again my videos is going to cover all this in the modules coming up, is how to sharpen the bushcraft knife properly. But all this obviously will come later on. So when people say bushcraft is easy, it's not. There's a lot of skill involved in bushcraft, and it takes many years to, sometimes many years, to hone your skills, especially sharpening and maintaining your tools. That can take months, or in my case several years, to get good at it, because it just depends on the human being. It just depends on you and your rate of learning, so to speak, which might be different to mine, because obviously with the problems that I have, it takes me longer to process things, it takes me longer to learn. So for me, it's kind of been, it took years and kind of a lifetime journey until I can find the right equipment and the right tools for me. So without waffling on, I've actually wrote down just a few pointers so I don't forget, because I'm very forgetful. If you know me, forget me. Okay, so beginner's knife. Okay, so we'll start at number one. So why do we need a knife? Why do we need a knife for bushcraft? Well, obviously it's quite obvious. When you go camping and you want to study bushcraft, we need a knife to either process wood. We need to learn how to whittle, how to make things, because that is the sole essence of bushcraft. We make what we need from the environment that nature provides. So let's say you need a tent peg, so you make a tent peg. You use a knife to make a tent peg properly, without picking the stick up and just like hammering it into the ground. And obviously later on it's just going to snap off. So you learn these things. You learn how to make a pot hanger, a tripod. All these things is going to be in later on modules. All these things that I'll be showing you from step-by-step guides, if you kind of think. Because like I said, there is thousands and thousands of videos out there on bushcraft, and they each, a lot of them are obviously better than my videos, because they know how to video edit. They've got probably the best equipment, where I haven't. I've just got a phone. I do everything on my phone, and I'm not really technical minded at all. So same as today, I'm using my phone. But why do we need a knife? We need a knife to process wood. We need a knife to carve things, to make things what nature provides. Tent stakes, pot hangers, things of that nature, bow drills, eventually when you learn how to do fire by friction. So we need some sort of knife to make them things. Otherwise, what's the point in learning bushcraft if you don't learn how to use a knife? Yeah. Obviously it's sod's law, really. You know, it's kind of essential tool for a bushcrafter. And I don't see how you can be a bushcrafter without some sort of knife, without some sort of sharp object to make things. Um, so that's why we need a knife. That's point one. So number two is, where do I start? Now this is again, it's a very hard question to answer. Where do we start with your first bushcraft knife? There are so many knives out there, so many steels, and it all depends on obviously on your budget, which is obviously the next item 3 is like budget. So we'll come back to that in a bit. So where do I start? And again, in the world of bushcraft and knife shops and things and retailers, there's so much options out there. But again, talking about the scale, it all helps to start at the bottom end. Okay, so you don't need to buy a super steel knife with super qualities and it needs to be 10mm thick and and things like that, because that's when it starts to get complicated. And if you've never used a knife in your life and never sharpened a knife in your life, and you spend ridiculous amounts of money on a knife, then you're just going to mess it up. You'll mess the edge up, you'll scratch it and chip it to bits, and then you're going to be disappointed. Okay, so where do I start? Is you start at the beginning. You start as basic as you can get. Obviously there's different styles of knives. I'm not going to go through them all because it's pretty much impossible. I'll be here for hours and hours and ends, because there is thousands and thousands of different knives, steels, shapes, sizes. Okay, so the more common one for the tool, as Dave Canterbury says, the tool for the common man. Back in the day, like 1800s, talking about, where the only knife that people had, maybe up and down the frontier, is things like butcher's knives, kitchen knives, things like that. And then they would take it into the field and they will do everything with a kitchen knife or a butcher's knife, everything. And that's the only kind of knives they had, because obviously knives back then was pretty much expensive to import in. A lot of knives was imported from like Sheffield, England and things, even simple butcher's knives and kitchen knives and things. And they were very expensive, and there was a lot of forgeries as well. Anything to make a quick buck. Nothing's changed since then. Everybody's trying to invent knives, steels with amazing steel and things like that, and sell it for a ridiculous price. So that's up to the consumer really, we as consumers. But as basic as you go, maybe your dad or granddad, when they were growing up, they had some sort of pocket knife, maybe something like this. Okay, so Swiss Army knife, otherwise known in the bushcraft community for short, is SAK, S-A-K, Swiss Army knife. Okay, now I've always had some sort of Swiss Army knife on me ever since I was younger. I think my granddad, who obviously passed away now, but my granddad gave me my first knife. I think I was probably maybe 10 or 11 years old. I wasn't very old at all, and it was a Swiss Army knife. And well, she didn't have green scales, it had red scales. I'm not too sure what type of Swiss Army knife it was, but it was my first knife. Absolutely amazing. I was buzzing, you know, and I took it out straight away and started, like, obviously at that age you don't know, dear. I was like slicing things and maybe like cutting my fingers to bits and things like that where I missed, because I didn't know what I was doing. So Swiss Army knife, for bushcraft, is it good for bushcraft? Well, yeah, it is, if you can make it work. You know, like I say, back in the day, everybody, your granddad, maybe your dad, everybody had a pocket knife. Everybody carried a pocket knife, and they do carry it, you know, come in handy. You know, you go to the local park or something like that. Maybe your dad or granddad, and they just happen to take the army knife out and just pick a stick up and start whittling. They don't know what they was whittling, and it doesn't really matter. It just gives you something to do, and it does come in handy. You know, I've heard stories, not just when I was growing up, but even now, that people's lives have actually been saved purely because they carried a pocket knife, maybe to cut a seat belt, when somebody's trapped in the car that was set on fire or something like that in a car accident, and the only way they got out before the car exploded was the seatbelt was cut. Okay, so knives come in handy when you haven't got idiots out there stabbing each other, which I won't go into. But yeah, so yes, you can use this for bushcraft. There's no problem. You can carve with it and things like that, but because you make it work as you're learning, can you make it work for years and years of bushcraft as you get more skilled and develop your skills and you start to build and make bigger things, then a knife like this really, it kind of makes redundant, and then it becomes a part of your everyday carry, or again the terminology EDC, everyday carry, is something on your belt you can just grab off. And the reason for that is if you want to learn all the ins and outs of bushcraft, is this is a folding knife which folds in on itself, doesn't lock in position or anything like that, and it will always be a folding knife. There's no change in that, and therefore in the world of bushcraft it can be a dangerous tool, especially with your fingers, as I found out many years ago. Okay, so for slicing, yeah, it's fine, whittling and things like that, it's fine, but when you start to get into bushcraft and start doing more things, then you might find that the blade is too short and you need a longer blade. You definitely can't process wood as good. When I say process wood, if you're still a beginner, when we mention things like batoning, which you may or may not have heard, which means splitting wood with your knife. Now, there is a way of batoning with a folding knife, which I'll probably demonstrate one day, I'm not too sure, but if you can't wait that long, then there's plenty of videos on YouTube showing you how to baton. But this is a folding knife, guys, with pinned in scales, with other tools on there. So if you're going to baton with a Swiss Army knife or similar, it's not going to last long at all. So yes, you can use a folding knife up to a certain point when you want to make something bigger or more heavy duty. Then you need a more heavy duty knife. Okay, so for instance, you need to drill a hole. Okay, so you get your piece of wood, you get your knife, and you start drilling a hole. Now the problem with that, this is a folding knife. Okay, so give you an example. Again, this video is purely for beginner. You might find it strange or even laugh, but I'm just trying my best to get through to the beginner about the use of different knives, different knife styles. Okay, so this is a piece of wood and you want to drill a hole for your piece of wood, and suddenly your knife folds in on itself, okay, as you're drilling through the wood. The knife folds in itself, and obviously this is only going to go in one direction and it's going to go straight there into your fingers. Now, I keep my knives extremely sharp. Now, Swiss Army knives are extremely sharp, so if the knife folds in on itself onto your fingers when you're trying to do things like drilling a hole through a wood with a folding knife, then you could be in big trouble. Maybe even lose a finger or a tendon or something like that, I don't know, depending on your injury, but I have done that before. Well, there's quite a lot of things that I've done in my life that I regret, but yes, I have done that before with a folding knife, and it's cut my fingers quite badly, and I've got the scars to prove it. So that's one negative about starting bushcraft with a folding knife. Yes, you can do it, but you can only do it so far. So then we move on. Well, now again, silly me, I'm not prepared for my video properly, but then we go with a locking blade. Maybe a big choice is the buck, like buck 110, which locks into place. So you've got no chance of, when you're drilling holes, of that knife folding in and chopping your fingers and cutting your fingers off and things like that. But again, it comes into the category of it'll only go so far. Okay, are you confident that that lock will always be in that lock position, even when you're batoning, splitting wood down with your knife? So as you're hammering the spine on your knife, are you confident that lock is going to always stay in position without bending back on itself? I very much doubt that. There is some folding knives out there that's really heavy duty, and the lock on it is pretty much indestructible. But there's always that doubt in your mind about that blade. Will it fold in on itself? And certainly if you're going to be using a knife for heavy duty wood processing like batoning, using a knife that folds in, even a locking blade, would not be my first choice, because there's obviously, as I said before, there's always that possibility of the knife, maybe the knife lock breaking and things like that, and falling in on itself. So then we've done folding knives, locking knives, which I haven't got one on me. So discussed that. We've talked locking knives. Yes, you can use it for bushcraft, but to a certain extent. So where I'm going with this, we need a general, a good all-rounder, one that will have no problem with splitting wood, one that you can make things out of, doing notches, making tent pegs, pot hangers, whatever you want to make in bushcraft to process wood, without the fear of the knife falling in on itself. So then, excuse me again, just have some water. So then we come on to something like this. So this is budget friendly, which I'll discuss budget in a bit, which is probably number 3. Still number 2. But so we change up to something like this, which is called a fixed blade knife, meaning it's the blade is fixed, stationary in one position, and does not fold in on itself. So you've got no chance of that blade folding in and trapping your fingers and slicing your fingers. So if you're a beginner, this is what's called a fixed blade knife. Okay, so we moved up from the folding knife, and now we've moved on to the fixed blade knife, which is more ideal for bushcraft. This is where you want to be. Okay, you want to buy and use a fixed blade knife, okay, where it's not going to let you down, it's not going to fall in on itself, and this is where you need to be. This is where you need to start. It's a fixed blade knife. Again, fixed blade knives come in all different shapes and sizes, steels, thicknesses, etc., which we'll go into in later modules. But yeah, first knife, I recommend a fixed blade knife, a fixed knife, one that doesn't fold, or it's not got any moving parts for that blade to fold in on itself at all. So fixed blade knife. Okay, so put that down. So discussed why we need a knife. Obviously explain why we need a knife for bushcraft, for making things that nature provides. Discuss where do I start, because there's so many knife options on the market. Where where do I start, where do I look, what kind of knife do I need to use? We've discussed that. So we've discussed folding knives, and then we've moved on from there from fixed blade knives. Okay, so my recommendation will be fixed blade knife as a starting point for bushcraft. Okay, now we come into the third topic, which is how much is a knife. Now I know a lot of knife makers, I know a lot of knife retailers and people that own their own business, so I'm not going to give you a list of, yeah, this is the best place to buy the knife from, or this place, this guy is cheaper than this guy. I'm not going to go into that, because obviously if I go into that, then I'm going to be biased, and I'm going to basically recommend one shop, and then I'm going to get messages saying, well, you recommended him, but why didn't you recommend my shop? Now give you discounts and blah. You get my drift. And the world of bushcraft, like I said at the start of this video, is just massive competition between obviously rival retail firms and things like that, and everybody wants to make a profit and things like that. So I'm not going to go into this knife costs this much and you can buy it from here. I'm not going to go into that. So I'm not going to be causing arguments or anything like that. So in regards to where to buy your knife from, that is up to you guys. All I can do is recommend the knives that for a starting point. Okay, so the name of the knife, and we're going to go on to kind of budget retail knives. So I'm not going to go into custom knife. That becomes much later on in modules, because the custom knife is purely down to you, the individual. So in this video we're going to discuss retail knives. Okay, so knives that's already been made, that they're selling in the shops to a certain extent, if you get me. So I'm not going to go too much into knife brands, but I will say the more common brands is Mora, which you'll hear a lot about. Mora, in the bushcraft community, Mora tends to be king, which I'll explain why. There is Hultafors, which is the one I showed you. It's probably upside down with camera, but this is Hultafors. Okay, very cheap, very strong blade, hidden tang, but it is extremely strong. I think it's full tang construction up to a certain point, probably up to about there. So, but it's a hidden tang anyway. So, but it's still strong because I've done a lot of wood process with this knife. So we've got Mora, we've got Hultafors, okay, and I think they're probably going to be the cheapest. We've got probably Barco as well. So I've got Barco. So Hultafors, Mora, Barco. I think in terms of budget, I think those are probably the best to go for. When I say budget, the budget is entirely up to the individual. I don't know what you can afford, what you can and can't afford. But when you're talking about budget, it's got to be, your first bushcraft knife needs to be the cheapest bushcraft knife that you can find that will do the job that you require it to do. There is no need to spend hundreds of pounds on your first knife when you don't know how to use it, and you don't know how to maintain it, and you don't know how to sharpen it. Okay, so you need to get a knife that you can practice on for hours and hours every time you go out, repetition after repetition, and practice sharpening on it, practice wood processing on it. Okay, so that's why you need your first knife needs to be as cheap as possible. So that's where companies like Mora of Sweden or Hultafors or Barco come into play. So in terms of budget, I'd say anywhere around maybe 20 to 30 pounds, I'd say. So if you can get a really budget friendly bushcraft knife for under 30 pounds, then that's all you need. Now I'd say the maximum is 30 pounds. For the beginner, I'd say around about 20 pounds or even less than 20 pounds. Okay, so like I say, there's no good going out there and buying your first knife that's £200, £300, because it's just not going to last. You know, you're a beginner and you're just going to mess it up basically. So start off at lower scale, the lower scale. So 15, 20, no more than 30 pounds. Less than 30 pounds is better. Okay, because if something happens to your knife, like you happen to break it or something like that, then you can go out and buy another one for 15 quid, 15, 20 quid, something like that. So having a budget in mind for the bushcrafter, that's where I'd start. So the cheaper the better. Okay, yeah, and maybe in that price range the steel is not going to be as good as the top end of the steel, which again we'll discuss in later modules. But at this stage, at this point in your bushcraft journey, none of that matters, not yet. So don't overcomplicate yourself with knife names, knife steels, thickness, knife shapes, sizes, whatever. Okay, so at this stage, none of that matters, none of it. Okay, so what you're looking for is a fixed, cheap bushcraft knife. Okay, which around, if you can find one for around 15, 20 quid, then go for it. Okay, And these are the knives that I personally recommend for your journey. And a lot of a bushcraft, if you ever go to a bushcraft course or anything like that, 9 times out of 10 they'll give you maybe a Mora companion heavy duty, something like that. So starting point, I'd definitely probably recommend Mora. Now I'm not saying Mora is the best knife out there, because it is not, it's not, but Mora is probably the best budget friendly knife out there to start your journey into bushcraft. Okay. Halterfers also comes into that range as well. These are very cheap knives, incredibly strong as well, so no problem with this. I think this is called a OK4, and they do OK1. I prefer the OK4 because it's got like a really nice textured rubber handle, and I don't know how much these are these days. I'm sure they've got to be around 20 quid surely. Cheap, it might be cheaper, I don't know, but yeah, highly recommend Halterfers if you don't like the look of Mora or things. But like I say, looks and performance steel at this stage, at your stage, none of that matters. Okay, all that is later on when you're more experienced. Okay, so Mora companion, heavy duty, maybe Mora robust. I mean, Mora do full tang knives like Mora Garberg and the latest one, but they're at the minute they're stupid money. So we talk, and this goes over the budget. So we're talking about 15-20 quid knives. So yeah, low end of the scale, definitely a Mora companion, heavy duty. So that's where a lot of people tend to start. And you never know, you might like Mora so much. When you get more experience, you'll buy probably a much dearer Mora, like a Mora Garberg or something like that everybody raves on about, and I've owned myself. But I've moved away from Mora because I've kind of come away from the basics, and I'm now over this scale where I prefer custom made knives and things like that, which again we'll discuss later. But Mora is definitely your go-to, I think, when it comes to bushcraft. So look up Mora knives, Mora Kniv of Sweden, and you'll definitely find a knife in there from your budget. Second thing I would consider is go for carbon steel. It doesn't matter what carbon steel it is. Okay. So I think Mora carbon steel, they do carbon steel, but they also do a cheap stainless steel. Okay, so either one of them is fine, but if you can, try and get a carbon steel one, because carbon steel is easier to sharpen, and it tends to be a lot stronger, a lot more robust than stainless steel. Stainless steel tends to be slightly harder to sharpen, which again I'll go into in later modules. But carbon steel, the only downside to carbon steel is, which again I'll go into, is they tend to rust easily if you put it away when it's wet or damp, or your sheath's damp or things like that. Then it will rust overnight, definitely. Okay, but it's a starting point. Fixed blade knife, try and go with carbon if you can, not stainless steel. Okay, so I've just answered my own question there. So point number 4 is, what steel do I choose? And I've kind of already answered that for you. So try and get carbon steel if you can. Okay, so again, strength wise, easy to sharpen. Yeah, that basically comes into its own, and you'll learn that along the way in your bushcraft journey, that a lot of people prefer carbon steel to stainless steel. I certainly do. I don't like stainless steel. I kind of think it's, I won't say a gimmick, but I'd say it has its limitations. Yeah, it's stainless steel. Yes, it rusts a lot. Does rust a lot easier than carbon does, because carbon steel is very horrible for staining and rusting and things like that. But On the plus side, in the field, we're talking about basics of bushcraft, carbon steel is hell of a lot easier to sharpen in the field than stainless steel is. So yeah, try and go through that. So what video is now? So we're on to 34 minutes, 35 minutes now. So I'm going to break off there because the next part is going to be, we discuss grinds. Now knife grinds take a lot longer. I'm going to discuss each and every one, but for the beginner, I would start with what's called a Scandi grind or Scandinavian grind, which is basically like this. Okay, you can see that shiny edge there, and I'll go into that into the part 2, which probably won't be as big as part 1. So I hope that helps you out, the beginner, of where to choose your knives and what knives I recommend to go with on a budget, and discussed several options for you and why the knife options what I've chosen would be good for you as a starter, as a beginner. So I'll see you in part 2, where I discuss knife grinds and what knife grind I recommend for the beginner. So see you in part 2. Bye for now.